On this Sunday night, holy smokes. The American West Coast up in flames and their effect on air quality.
The air we're breathing right now is equivalent to smoking 20 packs of cigarettes.
It's hard to breathe in Canada, too. Careless COVID-19 attitudes, what critics say the government needs to do about it. Honoring Aline Chrétien, the former Prime Minister's most trusted confidant. And Nellie Carlson's relentless fight for equality.
She is a little dynamite.
Setting the path for future Indigenous generations.
Global National with Robin Gill.
Today is not a day to be outside on the West Coast. This is the afternoon sky in Vancouver. The mountains and skyline are shrouded in smoke, and there isn't a glimmer of sunlight to be seen. Good evening and thank you for joining us. The wildfire emergency in the United States has created a hazardous situation for people living in British Columbia. Environment and Climate Change Canada has issued air quality advisories for much of the province, but the health risk is highest throughout southern BC. People with respiratory and heart conditions, as well as those with diabetes, are being told to avoid or reduce outdoor activities. The same goes for pregnant women, infants, children, and older adults. There are also concerns for the well-being of homeless and socially marginalized people who may not have adequate shelter. The health risks in Western Canada are serious, and in the days ahead, other parts of the country could be affected by the smoke. But south of the border, the emergency is far worse. At least 33 people have died, and that number is likely to rise. As Mike Drolet reports in our top story tonight, the environmental disaster won't get any relief until the rains arrive.
The sun may be shining on the U.S. West Coast, but few have seen it through the thick black smoke that has blotted it out.
A horror. Horrible. You don't know whether your home is going to be there when you get back.
More than 100 fires up and down the coast continue to set records. Last week alone, Oregon saw double the area burn that it normally sees in a year. And 3 of the 5 largest wildfires in California history are burning right now.
You know, this thick smoke coming up from Oregon, Washington, and California is essentially relentless at this point.
The winds are pushing the smoke inland and north into Canada. In parts of British Columbia, the air quality index is at its maximum. The smoke's so thick, it's as if the fire is burning nearby. BC and Alberta have been affected the most, but the sheer size of the smoke field threatens to make this a national event.
Starting tomorrow in a substantial way, you know, making its way through southern Saskatchewan, possibly as well affecting Manitoba, Ontario, and even Quebec.
In the Pacific Northwest, officials admit they won't be able to contain the fire until the winter rains arrive. In the meantime, it's an environmental disaster that is set to become a political flashpoint when President Donald Trump, who denies climate change as a factor in the fires, visits California on Monday.
It's about forest management and other things, but forest management.
Trump will tour some of the disaster zones, but all eyes will be on how or if he's received by California's governor.
This is a climate dam emergency.
And Los Angeles' mayor, who said on CNN when he needs advice on matters of science, he doesn't listen to the president.
Talk to a firefighter if you think that climate change isn't real. And it seems like this administration are the last vestiges of the Flat Earth Society of this generation.
Causes aside, what the West Coast needs right now is help. Mike Drolet, Global News.
The southern U.S. is bracing for a possible hurricane as Tropical Storm Sally gains steam. It soaked parts of Florida with about 300 millimeters of rain. That led to flash flooding in Miami and the surrounding areas. Sally is now moving into the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico and is expected to approach land late Monday, bringing a powerful storm surge with it. A hurricane warning is in effect for a stretch of the Louisiana coast, including New Orleans. Mandatory evacuation orders have been issued in some areas. This is peak hurricane season in the Atlantic. Look at all the systems out there, including Hurricane Paulette. It's a Category 1 storm that is expected to strengthen as it moves toward Bermuda tomorrow. To the pandemic now, and a snapshot of the daily new case numbers in this country. Atlantic Canada and the Territories have no new cases to report tonight. BC and Alberta will have their weekend tallies tomorrow. But for the third day in a row, Ontario has reported more than 200 cases. Quebec has the biggest spike with 279. That's Quebec's largest single-day increase in more than 3 months. Canada's chief public health officer is again reminding Canadians not to get complacent. Part of the problem is that some people just don't care. Mike Armstrong explains why and what researchers want governments to do to shift attitudes.
Who lives here? This video may be the perfect example of young people and indifference towards COVID-19.
If you have 8 people in the house, then that means you can really only have 2 people over.
2 over?
Yeah.
It was a police officer in Ohio breaking up a small house party on a university campus. The students were breaking the rules, having too many people at the home.
Yeah, you might want to start clearing them out, man.
Yeah, that's fine.
Please.
But when the officer pulled up information on one of the occupants,
hey Zach, can you come here?
He found something shocking.
I've never seen this before. There's an input on the computer that you tested positive for COVID?
Yes.
When was this?
This was a week ago.
Are you supposed to be quarantining?
Yeah, that's why I'm at my house.
As it turned out, several people in the home had tested positive for COVID-19 and were still having people over.
So you're not quarantining if you're mixing with other people?
140, okay.
So everybody here has it?
Direct.
Oh my gosh.
Now, that sort of disregard fits perfectly with a new study by Quebec researchers. 1,500 people were polled. They found young people are less scared of the potential consequences of COVID-19 and less likely to follow safety protocols. What was surprising was that young people were also most likely to overestimate their chances of contracting the virus. Many think they're going to get it and still don't follow protocols.
They are very well aware of what they are doing and the consequences on their own risk to contract COVID-19.
That's one of the reasons the researchers say governments can't only focus on a medical response to the virus. Whether it's targeted advertising or fining rule breakers, the social side to changing attitudes and actions is vital.
The disease spreads because of our behavior. So it's not only a medical problem, but it's a problem of the society.
Now, there was another group that stood out in the study as less likely to follow directives: men. Compared to women, they're less likely, for example, to wash their hands, or if they do, to wash them well.
So who all lives here?
Another example where a cavalier attitude can have consequences. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
The wife of former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien has passed away. Akin Chrétien died peacefully Saturday morning, surrounded by family in her Quebec home. She rarely spoke in public, but behind the scenes, she was her husband's most trusted confidant, advising him on key decisions in the 40 years of his political career, including the Quebec independence referendum in 1995. That same year, she helped save the Prime Minister's life after coming face to face with a knife-wielding intruder who had broken into their Ottawa residence. Akin Chrétien came from humble beginnings in Shawinigan and met her future husband on a bus when she was 15 years old. They married 6 years later and celebrated their 63rd wedding anniversary this week. The cause of death has not been made public. Akin Chrétien was 84 years old. In less than 24 hours, polls will open in New Brunswick in the first provincial election since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. A record number of people has already voted, but the rest of Canada will be watching to see how Election Day plays out and whether the risk of running a campaign during a pandemic can pay off politically. Ross Lord reports.
New Brunswick's election campaign is a bit shorter than most, 28 days, but it will be remembered for another distinction.
I mean, it's certainly a first with the pandemic, and I guess they had no other choice if they couldn't come up with a deal together, so, we'll see who gets majority or if it's another minority.
PC leader Blaine Higgs is riding a wave of popularity from his government's success against COVID-19. Going into the weekend, New Brunswick had only 2 active cases and just 2 deaths since the pandemic started. A former Irving Oil executive, Higgs is haunted by controversy after a botched attempt to cut health care services in rural areas. Liberal leader Kevin Vickers is a former sergeant-at-arms in the House of Commons. He's best known for helping stop the 2014 Parliament Hill terrorist attack. Vickers is making his first attempt at public office. Among the big campaign issues is the question of whether the time is right for an election.
That was a bit of a shock. I thought, was it really necessary?
The pandemic, we don't know how long it's going to go on. We have to be realistic and with the knowledge that life goes on, politics goes on.
Election planners say turnout at advance polls was extremely high, and there's been a big increase in the number of mail-in ballots. Officials believe that's a sign New Brunswickers want to sidestep Election Day crowds and limit any possible exposure to the virus.
Well, I think it's been pretty cordial. Everybody has agreed to play by the rules, wear masks, not hold large events, not have big barbecues and free hot dogs.
Public opinion polls suggest Higgs might indeed increase his party's share of seats, possibly to 25 or more, which would boost the PCs into a majority. Ross Lord, Global News, Fredericton, New Brunswick.
Let's bring in our chief political correspondent, David Akin. David, this election is a test for pretty much any future election in this country, given we're in a pandemic. How will this health crisis affect the results?
Yeah, I think this is a referendum essentially on an incumbent who wants some political stability as we get into economic recovery mode. And this is an incumbent, Blaine Higgs and the Progressive Conservatives, that have a minority government right now in New Brunswick. And so Blaine Higgs has called an early election to say to his voters, let's have a referendum on how I did on the health crisis and how we should do in the economy. And you know what? Look around the country right now. In BC, Robin, Premier John Horgan, a minority government. Voters in BC give him good marks on handling the health crisis. Does he call a fall election, again, seeking some stability? Saskatchewan, Scott Moe, they're going to have an election there this fall. It's probably going to be a referendum on health and economy. And of course, think about the federal government situation. The Trudeau minority government will face some confidence votes this fall. But again, if voters have on their minds, it's a referendum on how you did through the health crisis and how you're about to do through economic recovery, maybe opposition politicians don't want that election. Anyways, New Brunswick is where we're going to test this theme out first.
And this is the first election in this country where candidates had to conduct a contactless campaign.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. So Elections New Brunswick is quite prepared. They're taking steps to make sure that their own workers in polls are safe, that voters can be safe if they go to the polls. But get this, advance voting is up 50% compared to 2018. Now, as far as the parties go, they've had to figure out how to find voters, voter ID, get out the vote without doing all the door knocking you normally do and without those big fundraising rallies. It's been a very different campaign as everybody figures out how to do this. There's been a lot of use of technology to track voters and get voters out to the polls.
And here we are on the eve of Election Day. Did Premier Higgs' gamble pay off?
It looks like it's going to. All the polls we've seen shows the PCs still have a bit of an edge. The gap has narrowed, though, between the Liberals and the PCs, so we'll see. One thing that has been consistent throughout the campaign is the Green Party is polling above their 2018 levels of support. They're doing very well, and that could be a factor. The Greens could pull away some support from the Liberals. That would help the PCs. In any event, this part of the country is where the Greens seem to be doing best. They have 3 seats. That's the same as in BC. Could they get more tomorrow? It's going to be an interesting race.
All right. Thanks for your analysis, David. David Akin and Ross Lord will be part of our Decision New Brunswick special coverage tomorrow night. You can watch it on globalnews.ca, on the Global TV app, and on television for viewers in Atlantic Canada. Coming up, the Trump campaign for Dizon, despite admitting he downplayed the pandemic, and why Israel is heading into another lockdown. When it comes to COVID-19, the U.S. still has the world's most cases and the most deaths. But American voters won't be hearing Donald Trump talk about the coronavirus on the campaign trail. Jennifer Johnson explains what Trump wants his fans to focus on instead, as he faces a firestorm of criticism over the way he downplayed the pandemic.
I've spent the last 4 years bringing our jobs back to America, securing our borders, rebuilding our military.
U.S. President Donald Trump selling voters on his record before the COVID-19 pandemic swept across America. Few in the tightly packed crowd in Nevada were wearing masks, as the president claimed his Democratic opponent Joe Biden's plan to fight the crisis is a threat to civil liberties.
Want to lock law-abiding Americans in their homes, which is what they're doing. And they want to keep them out of church. They really do. They're fighting God.
President Trump is facing severe backlash after admitting to journalist Bob Woodward on tape in early February he downplayed the virus.
I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down.
Yes, sir.
Because I don't want to create a panic. This is deadly stuff.
Woodward on CBS's 60 Minutes says the president told him he knew the virus was maybe 5 times more deadly than the flu.
This is the tragedy. A president of the United States has a duty to warn. The public will understand that.
Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden is blaming the president for millions of Americans sickened by the virus and nearly 200,000 dead.
He lied to the American people. He knowingly and willingly lied about the threat it posed to the country for months.
Many medical experts say the president should have been honest about the need to prepare for the COVID-19 threat.
Telling the truth never causes panic. If you just tell people the truth, they will respond and they will trust you to continue to tell them the truth. And the great leaders of the world have done that.
The pandemic taking center stage as medical experts warn the death toll will continue to rise before Election Day. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
One-time Democratic presidential candidate Michael Bloomberg is shelling out some major cash in hopes of getting Joe Biden into the White House. Bloomberg is spending as much as $100 million on Biden's campaign in Florida. Recent polls show Trump and Biden are neck and neck in the Sunshine State. Voters there can start mailing in ballots at the end of the month. Still ahead, as the pandemic continues, another country heads back into lockdown.
You're watching Global National.
A freak sandstorm darkened midday skies near Turkey's capital. A time-lapse shared by the city's mayor shows massive dust clouds engulfing nearby buildings. Officials say 6 people were injured by the strong winds. 100,000 protesters gathered in the capital of Belarus today in one of the biggest demonstrations yet, demanding the country's longtime ruler quit. Anger is not letting up. Protests have been sweeping the country since last month's contentious election handed Alexander Lukashenko a landslide victory and a 6th term in office. Thousands of people have been detained. At least 3 people have been killed and hundreds hurt as police break up the crowds. The opposition claims the vote was rigged and key figures have since been jailed or fled the country. Israel's government is reimposing a COVID-19 lockdown to contain a surge in cases. The 3-week shutdown will start Friday, which is the start of the Jewish holiday season. People will have to stay within 500 meters of their homes except to go to work and exercise. Schools, restaurants, and non-essential shops will be closed. The decision has divided the nation grappling with a recession. Israel is the first country to order a second nationwide lockdown. Up next, the remarkable life of Indigenous advocate Nellie Carlson. Montrealers did their part today to help those who most need it by leaving non-perishable items on their doorsteps for food banks to collect. Food banks across the country have seen an increased demand since the pandemic started. There are some causes that are too great to stop fighting for. Alberta's Nellie Carlson knew this well. She spent decades battling for rights for Indigenous people. Her sheer willpower was her greatest weapon. In the wake of her passing this week, Jamie Dahl looks at Carlson's remarkable journey.
It's pretty hard on me and pretty hard on the children too, I imagine, because she was the head person.
She had a grade 8 education, was a residential school survivor, a champion for change.
She was a little dynamite with a real sense of humor, a ready wit, fun to be around. But she really, when she says something, she means it.
Nellie Carlson passed away at the age of 93 in Edmonton on Thursday. Her legacy as long and as full as the life she lived, as was her humility.
what did I do? Yeah, this was just only the journey of my life, what I did. It didn't cost me nothing.
But it sure made a massive impact on so many lives. Nellie was Cree, and 73 years ago, she married a Métis man, Elmer. In doing so, she lost her Aboriginal status.
When we first married, that was about 2 weeks later, she said she got a letter from the government telling her she was no longer an Indian. Which hurt her very much, you know. It really hurt her. And she fought for her status for the next 17 years.
The mother of 9 never stopped fighting. She was instrumental in changing the Indian Act and restoring Indigenous rights to generations of women. Her fortitude inspiring many, and this Edmonton school on sacred Indigenous land bears her name, keeping her legacy alive.
The kids loved having her here. She stood up for equity, for equality, for human rights. She stood up for the rights of women in general, and she was also very committed to the whole idea of education.
Carlson was honored to have a school named after her, and she leaves this message for all those young minds inside.
I hope that they are going to be blessed with good ideas. It was an idea, I guess, maybe that I really had in my head that I just used it.
Jamie Dahl, Global News, Calgary.
And that is Global National for this Sunday. I'm Robin Gill. We leave you tonight with a tribute to Terry Fox. Google is running a special illustration depicting him during his Marathon of Hope in 1980, when he set off on a run across Canada to raise money for cancer research because of his own fight with bone cancer, which led to his leg being amputated. 4 months into his fundraising effort, Fox had to stop because the cancer had spread to his lungs. He died the next year. Today marks 39 years since the first Terry Fox run was organized in his name. Thank you for watching. Donna Friesen will be back here tomorrow, and I'll see you next weekend. Have a great night.